I'm Jean Gray, publisher of American Entrepreneurship Today and host of the podcast series Experience Voices, where I talk with highly accomplished people who share the critical elements that led to their success. Today on Experience Voices, we're joined by Tim Seward, founder and creative visionary of ONYX Motors, an industrial designer turned mobility entrepreneur who has a passion for redefining electric transportation. While working with large corporations such as Nike, Google, and Intel, he saw opportunities to pursue mobility ideas that those organizations were not interested in developing. He had a particular interest in changing the performance and rider experience of electric bikes, which led him to launch ONYX Motors through a successful Indiegogo campaign. In our conversation, Seward discusses designing for commercialization, when creative vision must adapt to market realities, and the mistakes product designers must avoid to build ideas that endure. Tim, welcome to Experience Voices.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you. This is exciting.
I reviewed your design background, so I think this will be a very interesting conversation for listeners who are trying to introduce products to the market and having access to someone like yourself who has been in so much design. So let's start by just giving a concise description of where your industrial design career began.
Okay. So I started industrial design before I actually went to school for it. Unknowingly, I was a graphic designer. I was very into painting and drawing and art as I was growing up. And so I was going to school, community college for design, but I was also interested in biology. One of the main reasons why I was interested in taking biology classes and art classes was I wanted to develop like prosthetic legs, or I wanted to be a clinician for prosthetic legs because I, since 11 years old, have been dealing with a prosthetic leg because I had cancer when I was a kid. And I found as I was growing up with my leg that a lot of these businesses building legs and companies building the parts for it, and also just the clinics, had a hard time building me a leg that wouldn't fall apart pretty quickly. I was a very active kid, and so I would always come in after 6 months with a broken leg. And so it got to the point where these clinics were building me like 10 legs at a time because I would go through them so fast. I was skateboarding, snowboarding, and they were really trying to figure out, granted, this is in the late 80s, early 90s, right? And so they were trying to figure out from a clinic standpoint and also from the product company, we were trying to figure out how to make their products stronger. They ended up figuring out that for someone of my high activity level, I actually needed a leg, or at least components that were built for someone that was like 400 pounds. Oh. Yeah, so knowing that as a kid, I was very interested in learning how to make these legs, right? And what I stumbled upon was industrial design. I had no idea that industrial design was a major. I didn't go directly out of high school right into college. I actually traveled across the country skateboarding and trying to find myself, right? And I was developing skateboards at the time, and I didn't really know that what I was doing was product development, like hard goods. I knew that I was building something, but I didn't really know the proper training and tools. And my mentor at the time, who developed the Icon aircraft and is a really renowned kind of engineer and product developer, his name's Steen Strand. He was the one who started this skateboard company, and he said, you really should look into industrial design. And I was thinking back, I was just looking at that. It seemed like my alley, right? Because it was a blend of, at San Jose State is where I ultimately went. It was a blend of design and art. So you were in the art building, but you got a bachelor's of science. And so to my dad, he thought that was awesome. Even though I had to pay my own way, my dad was very like critical of what major I was going to do. And so I was trying to like sell him on it. I was like, look, it's awesome. It's art. I love art, but it's also science and business and all these other things that you want me to be focused on. So that's how I got into industrial design. So I ended up, after a couple of years of traveling and having fun as a young 20-year-old, I ended up going back to school, is how I look at it, for industrial design, and got trained by some of, in my opinion, some of the best the best teachers that don't work at San Jose State anymore, but there was a pretty big alumni of teachers and professors that were at San Jose State from the 60s, and I got the tail end of those instructors before they all just retired. So I got pretty lucky to be instructed by them, and I learned a lot of really cool things about design, and ultimately got into my first job was developing the Sonos speakers for Sonos. I did the Sonos Sub and the Play 3, and I started working on the soundbar until once I moved on to other consumer electronics for bigger companies like HP and Intel, and ultimately ended up at Samsung and LG for developing a lot of their mobile products and houseware products. Yeah.
You have a moped company now. So share a little bit about how you made the transition from working for other people and taking on a startup and going your own way.
Well, it goes back to the beginning of my first real job was at a startup, right? So I was very interested in that kind of business. For me, there's a lot of freedom in a startup business where you can really pave your own way. So while I did really like working for some of the bigger companies, you had to really push it really hard to be noticed somewhere like LG or Samsung. And so for me, like my last corporate job was really at LG Electronics, and there was definitely things that I was seeing happening in the world that LG was so big that they just couldn't see it, no matter how hard I explained it to them. So I took a trip for work. I took a trip to Portland for LG Electronics. There was something around the mobile phones and TVs at hotels. And so I was developing all the TVs that go in all the hotels, which I still think is pretty cool today. I still see a TV that I designed in a hotel room at Hyatt. So I was there, and out front of the hotel was all these Nike bikes that you could rent. They weren't electric. And this is before the big rideshare movement of electric vehicles. It's before Bird, it was before everything. And I saw this and I said, wow, this would be so awesome if we made these electric and then said powered by LG Chem. And they were like, oh, people are going to buy our batteries anyway. We don't need to do this. and it was just like shot down. And I had all these really cool ideas around it. And so I started just making my own electric moped.
What year was that?
That was in around 2014. So I started developing all these different electric bikes, more or less. And by 2017, I had what we would call the RCR. And it went through a ton of iterations, right? The very early ones, I was experimenting with all sorts of different drivetrains and everything, and it just was way too expensive to develop as like a consumer product. And I wasn't really thinking so much as a consumer product. I was thinking of a vehicle that I could commute to work with and could get me there reliably, get me at a steady pace. Because really, if you want to travel at 35, 40 miles an hour with traffic, you actually need a vehicle that can exceed that by maybe 20 miles an hour faster. Because if it's the top speed is only 40, you're really pushing the limits of that vehicle to go that fast, and you'll drain the battery really fast, you'll overheat it. So if you want to have an average speed with the average drivers on the road, you actually need a vehicle that can kind of exceed the average speed, right? And so that's what I was trying to develop. It took me a long time to figure it out. Also, costs of parts, batteries and motors and everything was very expensive in 2014.
So were you working and doing this at night or on the weekends, or did you make the decision, or when did you make the decision, I'm going all in and I'm going to take this innovative idea I have and go for it?
So in general, I was always tinkering around with gas and electric vehicles. I have been since I was a kid. So my transition into electric started actually really early in 2010 with a designer who was developing an electric bike. And then he was the one who actually helped develop the Boosted board, which is an electric skateboard. He was also developing, solar panel systems and all sorts of stuff. He unfortunately had passed away, and He was really pivotal, I think, in the sustainable movement in the early 2010s. And he didn't really get very far. It was only like 2 years before he had passed away. And so it actually made me start to rethink how I was developing products, right? Because I was developing all these products that essentially people buy a new phone or a new smartwatch that I would design. It'd take me a couple years to design it, and then it would be out of style within a year. And so you would see it go up on eBay or just get thrown away. But whereas you would see electric vehicles or just vehicles in general that can be repaired usually those are classic vehicles. Those can stay with you for a long time. So I just started thinking about it and started building some prototypes. And when I decided to move into turning it into a real product, it was in 2016, 2017, when I was riding around my prototype and people just would stop me at every stop sign that I was at in their car or walking in front of me. And there was this one guy who literally crossed my path on a crosswalk, and he looked like maybe like an investor or businessman. And he literally was like, "Where can I buy this?" I said, "You can't buy it. It's mine." He's like, "Are you serious? What are you talking about? I can't buy this?" And I said, "No, you can't buy it." And he was confused and he was trying to figure it out. And so I eventually told him that I built it. It was just for myself and I just used it to get to work. He was like, "How can I invest in this? I'm an investor. I'd like to help you start this as a business." So we got to talking and I just ended up realizing like I didn't need him. Like I was like, this is great, but I am so familiar with, the Indiegogo and the Kickstarter, because I was doing a lot of those for other companies, that I could just do it myself. So I launched an Indiegogo. Basically, I took that experience and decided to I'm not going to get tied up with someone I don't really know. I'm just going to go and start an Indiegogo campaign, a crowdfunding campaign, and see how it goes. Because it's really, I had done a couple for myself, and they really weren't that difficult during the process, after fulfillment. All of my campaigns have been successful. I've never had a campaign that hasn't been successful. So I wasn't that scared to do it. And I tried it because I knew that if it didn't work out, I probably would have lost maybe like $3,000 to $6,000 in credit card fees for trying to advertise it on Meta or something. Because I really didn't have a huge credit card, so I wasn't going to rack it up too crazy, but I was definitely going to go into debt and figure out how to get out of it if it didn't work.
And so you did launch a campaign.
Yeah. So I launched ONYX Motors motorbikes on Indiegogo. So I launched the RCR on Indiegogo, and you can still find it today. It raised quite a substantial amount of money, so it had a lot of backers. Sold almost 500 bikes within a short period of time. But then I had to really figure it out because that was quite a lot. It was a lot more bikes than I expected. It was definitely hundreds more bikes than I anticipated.
So from the point where the campaign is successful and you are seeing the hundreds of investors behind your bike, how long did it take you to actually deliver to those investors?
So the campaign ended in June of 2018, and the first delivery happened in mid-December of 2018. But it wasn't a large number. It was about maybe 12 bikes. So that pales in comparison to how many that I sold. So there were still quite a few customers that were very anxious because originally I said it would only take 3 months to get you the bike, which was wildly incorrect and inaccurate. But that was a learning experience. There was a couple things that happened that made it a little bit more difficult. Like literally at the time that I started to receive product, because a lot of the electronics are from overseas, the first initial like 25% tariffs from Trump hit me. So I ended up not able to hire someone because I was putting the bikes together and building them in a warehouse with a bunch of employees. And so that reduced the amount of employees that I could hire to help me build the bike. So I ended up actually having to get in the mix and every day build several bikes, a total of about 10 bikes a week myself, to be able to keep up with the demand. And yeah, so that was very difficult for me to do, but the campaign really just took off and wasn't quite prepared for it, but we figured it out. In about 6 months, we started delivering all of the bikes.
And that was in early 2019?
So early 2019 is when the 50 bikes every 2 weeks would go out. So we got caught up by spring, middle of spring, early summer. We got caught up with all of the customers. The thing is, there were some outliers that did bleed into 2019 of the summer getting deliveries, but most of everyone was satisfied, in probably like Q2 of 2019. And then the rest were all new orders.
What did you learn in the process of having to build so many bikes? Because you go from, okay, I'll send out my first 12, and then realizing if you just do the basic math, if I do 50 a week or 50 a month, I'll catch up with all my orders. Just get a sense, because other entrepreneurs who are in the same situation where they're moving into some sort of quasi-manufacturing situation, from being a designer to a different skill set and even maybe a mindset.
So I think experience helps. So I had a lot of manufacturing experience with the skateboard company that I was talking about earlier. That really gave me a solid understanding of how to build in the United States, even though even with the skateboard parts, you would still get those from overseas. But being able to do the assembly and the assembly line and knowing how to do that and the shipping and all of the fulfillment and everything, I was very familiar with that for a decade at least. So I pretty much just transitioned that whole model over to the electric vehicle, although the hardest thing really was figuring out how to deliver something that's 5 times bigger than a skateboard, 5 times heavier, and understanding there's a massive cost difference in shipping. I found some solutions for that, which there was actual like motorcycle delivery services that weren't too expensive, and I was able to negotiate, if I build 50 bikes every 2 weeks, then my cost will be cut in half in shipping because I would load up a full truck for them. So I basically just, negotiating prices and thinking of it as not as an individual item, which you would think of as a skateboard or a t-shirt or something as more of an individual item going out and shipping to that person. You have to think of it as a much larger scale and how these vehicles will go to a hub, and then that hub's close to the delivery location, and then they'll disseminate from there. So they were basically putting all of the vehicles in separate hubs all around the country, and it did take a little bit longer than expected for the vehicle to show up to the end buyer, but that ended up working out. The other thing that I learned was I really, after doing it for a couple years, I really realized I needed a business partner, someone that was really focused on just the business side, because I couldn't do it all. Like, I was trying to do everything, and it was a lot, and I ended up just burning out initially because I was trying too much. And so my learning experience there is to find someone to partner with that you trust early on would be very helpful. And if you're more of on the designer side, then you need someone who complements you, that's more business focused and is really about the numbers and the sales. And if you don't really have strong marketing skills too, which you should if you're a designer, I think you should really learn how to do a lot of the marketing yourself. But it would be helpful to find someone who is really good at business sales and understands marketing as well, because those are all going to work together. I think those were some of the bigger things that I learned. Most of the other stuff I was pretty familiar with, which was just trying to find people. Creating a network is important, I think, and I learned that early on in other businesses. And so having that network was helpful, because I don't think ONYX would be a company today had I not known some of the people that I met through my network. For example, Steen, who I originally talked about with the skateboard company, I had left. I went to go work for Samsung, LG, all these other brands. But when I told him that I needed to start this company, ONYX, and he had a warehouse, the old skateboard company, because skateboarding, analog skateboarding, non-electric skateboarding was kind of dying, and he was looking to shut the company down. And we worked out a deal where I would get the warehouse if I helped him sell all of his product while I was starting my company. So very crazy. Like, so I was actually working for two companies at the same time to basically start ONYX, and it was absolutely insane. But yeah, yeah,
I was going to say, it shows the resourcefulness that you got through so much of the early stages, from getting it from your head all the way to delivering those 500 orders. So let's fast forward to maybe within the last year or so, because I know you are launching a new moped, RCR 80V. So tell us
right.
a little bit about that moped and where it stands in the history of what you've been building.
Yeah, so originally the RCR 72 volt, as it's called now, it was just the RCR. We named it the 72 volt because we knew we were coming out with an 80 volt, or we eventually knew we were going to come out with a successor. So the 72 volt means the system is on the 72 volt system. And that bike was very moped focused. It used a lot of parts from actual mopeds. And a lot of people think of mopeds as like a Vespa scooter, which is a seated scooter. That's not what the real definition of a moped is. A moped is actually kind of a blend between a bike and a motorcycle, and it has pedals. And in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, they were very, very popular. They were two-stroke motors, but they died out because of the two-stroke, right? The environmental aspect of them basically killed them. And so bringing them back as an electric vehicle was very popular because the bikes were popular. It just died out because of the system that they were on. So I made the 72 volt, got very popular, but eventually it got so big that people didn't, again, understand why I was using moped parts from the 70s. I think it's cool, it's nostalgic. You know, as you grew, people were kind of like, I don't understand, why aren't you using modern parts? And so the 80 volt, after years of the feedback on the 72 volt, we took all of that feedback and made the 80 volts. So literally everything that people complained about, everything that people thought was kind of strange, we fixed, we modernized it. It still looks very close to the original, which the way I look at it is much like Porsche, right? Porsche makes a vehicle that looks very similar to the very first Porsche, but they just keep advancing that platform. And that's how we're focusing on the RCR, as it gets advanced more and more and advanced. And some of the big advancements, because originally this vehicle was a commuter vehicle, and how I love to commute on it, I put CarPlay and Android Auto on it. So it has navigation. If you have a helmet with a headset, which they sell these speakers and microphones, and you can talk to your friends while you're riding, but you can also make phone calls, you can listen to music, and you can get navigation instructions right on your screen. So you can take your phone, put it in your pocket or your backpack, and not worry about it falling off your bike or someone taking it while you're riding. Or sometimes people forget that their phone is on their bike and they leave it outside. So the whole idea is to remove that issue of commuting and just make it all on the bike itself. It's one of the things that I just don't see on products today. That makes it really cool. The bike is a lot more powerful. It's a little bit bigger. It has bigger tires. And one of the other big notable things is because people commute on it, you get flat tires, right? And the old one used tubes, so inflatable tubes. And if you got a nail, you would have to take the whole tire off, replace the tube, and that on the side of the road, that is literally impossible. It's not as light as a regular bicycle, and you got to have the right tools to do it. So we developed, just like motorcycle, wheels for this bike that are tubeless. So if you do get a nail in your tire, you can use a patch kit on the side of the road. It takes less than 5 minutes to fix it. And it's very easy. You can put a plug in your tire, pump it back up with a small little portable air pump, and you can be on your way. And that's actually a huge improvement over a lot of vehicles right now, because a lot of vehicles in this class still use tubes. And so you can buy more robust tires for it, and you can basically not worry that you're going to get stranded. And that's one of the big things that we tried to advance on this vehicle, is to make sure that people can really reliably get to where they're trying to go. And it's probably, because it's electric too, it's probably one of the more reliable vehicles that you can use to commute on. So, yeah.
That's a really interesting transformation that you went through from the 72 to the 80. So let me ask you, I'm assuming there's a fan base because you mentioned that you were getting a lot of feedback on the moped, which spurred you to make a lot of changes. So as you were making these changes, which seemed to be quite considerable, did you tap into your fan base, or is there a what we call a community support that follows your bikes?
Yeah, so we have about 140,000 followers on Instagram. So it's a pretty sizable following. And then our groups, combined, if you even look at some of the outlier groups, we have somewhere around 60,000 people that are interested in our bikes. And then you can narrow that down to about 10,000 people who are like super fans, right? And those people are very vocal. And they've been vocal since the beginning of this company. And I didn't need to write it down. I mean, they say it so often, right? They would say it so often that it's just in the back of my head. And I just took all that feedback and literally just changed everything I could on the bike. So it's a brand new bike. Everything's been redesigned. Literally the only thing that's the same is the seat. And a lot of people don't understand why, but the people who have had a 72 volt understand. And the reason why is because I knew that the 72 volt owners that were going to buy our new bike had all these custom seats that they made and they spent a lot of money on, that they were going to transfer that over to their new bike. And had I not done that, then they would have been kind of upset. Like, I spent $300 or $400 on this seat for my old bike and I have to buy a whole new seat. So it was a kind of a strategic move to keep some of the parts that people actually customized to be able to put over and make it modular so it can go on the new bike. And so once people learned that, they thought, wow, that's actually pretty smart, because now I can just use my old seat, get rid of my old bike, put the seat from the 80 volt on the old bike and sell it and move on. It was interesting to see. I didn't test it. I just kind of had an idea that might work, and it did work out. So, yeah.
That's a really interesting point, because in entrepreneurship, the founders who are working on innovative products, having a connection to the end user market and not introducing something that they have in their head, but they actually know there's a pain point for, is sort of a common theme. So for what you're doing, it sounds like you have that connection with your users, that they feel vocal about what they like and what they don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I guess the question is, when you put the ADV together, how did you share it with some of your users, your fans? Did you just put it out there, or did you bring some into the shop and ride it around with people who would really appreciate the differences that you really put your heart and soul into?
So because we have a supplier of parts and a manufacturing partner, originally almost 2 years prior, I gave him sort of a list of things that the customers complain about. And he built a prototype for us and we tested it out, and it just really wasn't hitting the mark. It was pretty much just fixing the problems, but not advancing other things that would make it more exciting, right? So it just fixed issues, but it didn't really like make the product more exciting. That kind of got tabled, but a customer of ours ended up like purchasing that prototype because it wasn't being used, and he thought, oh, this is really cool. Like, he thought it was really awesome. And he ended up doing some modifications to it, and I started hanging out with him and realizing, hey, like, I wrote it and I wrote some of his modifications and said, wow, this actually is starting to get a little bit more interesting and more fun to ride. And so then I started to think about how I could further advance some of these things that he did to it, make it even more exciting. And that's how, the ADV started to really gain traction. And then once we had our first prototypes, we invited a bunch of influencers, people who review these types of bikes, a bunch of our customers, and let them go out and ride it and got their feedback. This is before we officially launched it. And so that was great to get a lot of the feedback. but we were pretty spot on, right? So everybody was very excited about it, and there was little tweaks of the feedback that we got that we needed to do, but we kind of already knew that. And that's mainly because we had been using it for a while and we already figured it out, but it was more of confirmation that this is going to be a successful product and that we just need to work on these little things to move it forward.
Segues into some of the basic questions about design. And maybe you could share a few points where, when, especially with your background, having worked with so many other product designers, is when they're sitting down for the design process. I guess the obvious one is you're focusing a little bit on the user experience. Are they happy now, or is there something I can bring to the market that would make them happier or give them a different experience? But share a little bit about your process of where you kind of go down a checklist of design to say, these are the things I work through that is getting me to the right end product. Is that hard for me to get you to describe that innovative process?
Yeah, the innovative process, for me, it really depends. Like if you're starting from the ground up or you're advancing an existing product or modifying an existing product, I would say most of the time, if you work for a design agency or a design firm, you're not really designing from the ground up. There are going to be the clients that come in and want to have the brainstorm, but usually the brainstorming sessions will happen at a corporation or a larger company, and it's internal, and that can happen for years before anything comes of it. So usually if you're at a design firm, you'll see that the process kind of starts where there's already been that year of thinking, and they just want you to maybe beautify it or advance it a little bit more and make it more marketable and palatable to the customer. So I've had both ends of the experience. And so for the RCR, when moving from the ADV, I would say that's more of taking an existing product and making it better. But the initial product, as you heard me talk about that, I had been thinking about that for it seems like almost a decade before it actually came to fruition. That's definitely way too long, but that was something that I was just doing on the side. Had it been something that I had started from the ground up, say a solid year of just development and understanding the market is, in my opinion, required before you can get into actually building. And if you're very knowledgeable in the space, you could probably advance that much faster. But if you're not knowledgeable in the space and there's a lot to learn, I think that you would be doing yourself a disservice, like just jumping into it, because there's a lot of other competitors likely that have a lot more knowledge than you, and you need to catch up to them. So there's a lot of learning, basically. It's for yourself and for your company and for your idea. And then you can narrow it down. Typically, industrial design focuses mostly on look and functionality, but developing from the ground up is a whole other can of worms that I've rarely done, right? I've rarely done. So I think it's one of those things where you got to be pretty confident in the market and just who you're targeting and know that there is a market for it.
It sounds like, if I was to guess, is that if you've got your foot firmly embedded in an industry and in a company that really exposes you to the marketplace, you have a notch up in your process. But there are a lot of people who start their process in their garage,
Right.
but they're not in the industry. I actually have an industrial designer in my family. So a lot of ideas start in the garage, but they're not in the industry in which they're envisioning what they want to change. And even if they've got a great idea, if they're not in the industry, they've got a long road to the marketplace. So that's where you were sharing, is that you had so much of the networking connections, you had the foundation, you were doing it for years, that allowed you get to places that I think a lot of other entrepreneurial industrial designers have to figure out, and it takes a lot of time.
It does, and it really comes down to understanding. I do think it really does come down to understanding the market. And there has been products that I know to this day would still be widely successful, and I have never launched them purely because I've watched the market and I've seen for products that are similar, what it requires to be successful. And I'll give you one example. I know that dogs and animals can communicate with you. Like they can let you know that they need to go to the bathroom, right? They can let you know they're hungry. And I've had an idea for over a decade. Let's just put it frankly, like get a dog to text message you a message, right?
Okay.
And sounds wild, but there's a really easy way to do it.
Okay.
And it would be very cost effective, $20 a pop for this device. But to effectively market it, you would need to have like friends that are veterinarians and tons of experience to really prove that this thing makes sense, even though it's only $20. And I've seen similar devices and similar products go out there, and they're all backed by professionals and people in the industry. And I'm not in the industry. Like I have a couple dogs and I love animals, but I've never taken that leap to try to make that product because I understand that I would have a lot of learning to do, or I would have to figure out how to sell it to someone who knows this market very well and can take it and expand on it. And so I could be the industrial designer that makes it for them, but I would need that extra help to be able to really make it a successful product.
That was kind of a discussion that I've had in the past where I viewed it as an opportunity cost, that we were really doing well in one particular area, and tried to explain that if we went down this other road, even though it was a really cool idea, is the time commitment and the learning curve would be so high, we would have to give up what our bread and butter was. And because I had put on my list of questions with speaking to another industrial designer, the whole aspect of when you have a vision, and I think you a little bit touched on it, is that you have to yield sometimes to another voice that it's not going to happen, that it's a really great idea and a great vision, but there's a whole litany of challenges if you go astray, so to say.
Yeah, early on, I can give you an example of some ideas that I had in the skateboard industry that never came to fruition. There's customers to this day who say, wow, it'd be so cool if you actually had made that, because they saw the designs. It was something that we put out there and we're intending on making this product, but it never came to fruition. And it was mainly stopped by the business guy who said, I just don't see a reason for us to do this. And I was so confused. I was young and I was so confused why. I was like, so many people want this. Why are we not making this? And it was mainly just cost and demand that he didn't believe it lined up. And I so badly wanted to prove him wrong, but my only way of proving him wrong was to make it and see what happens. Right? So, yeah. So that's not good enough. It's not good enough to convince someone, essentially.
And the pain level could be quite high.
Yeah.
Because I think once you go down the road and you make that investment and your commitment and your passion, then you start to see how high the mountain is to get it actually into the marketplace. The pain level is really quite high. So I'm commiserating or sharing with you some of I'm a business person who worked with an industrial designer. So,
Yeah.
So we have two different perspectives then on getting something to market. But look, Tim, I really enjoyed talking to you. So as like a sign off is, tell me a little bit about RCR ADV, its launch. Where can people learn about it or buy it online?
Yeah, so we launched the RCR ADV in the summer of 2025, so just like 6 months ago. It was on pre-order for several months. It's now being delivered to all of those customers and new customers that didn't purchase on pre-order. We're caught up to all of our past orders. So at this point now, it's very close to shipping now, which is pretty exciting for us because it's been months of big lead times before the bike would actually deliver to you. But now it's becoming shorter and shorter to weeks to now days, and eventually someone can come into their store and just pick one up. So it's one of the most exciting products that I've ever made as a consumer product designer, because it's something that's going to last for a very long time. That's, for me, that's very special. Like, someone can buy this, they can ride it around for years. And if they decide they want to give it to their kid or their son or daughter or sell it, that person who takes it from them, I know is going to take care of it because it is so much fun to ride. It's so exciting and it's very easy to maintain. There's almost no maintenance on this, right? And so it's very easy to operate and use, and it's going to last for decades. It's built to last for 50, 60 years easily. And that's so much different than any other product right now, I believe, on the market. Most products people view them as just throwaway items, and this is definitely not one of them. I would akin this more to furniture, where you buy a beautiful piece of furniture and it stays with you for a long time. And if you move on from it, it goes to the next person who's going to love it. And that's what I really love about the ONYX RCR. And it has, just from the beginning, it used to have a piece of laminated wood over the top. Now, because we wanted to advance it and make it last even longer, it's all metal, but we put a nice little piece of mahogany wood on the top of the battery cover to represent where it came from. And to me, that's just proof to show you that it's something that you should cherish and keep with you, as opposed to a lot of these other products that people just view as temporary.
That's pretty cool. So, Tim, thank you for being a guest on Experience Voices.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the podcast series Experience Voices. To hear more and subscribe, visit AmericanEntrepreneurship.com/podcast, where you will also find a form for listener feedback.